Hello and welcome to this episode of the DigiPod. My name is Farieha Aziz. Today I am joined by Imtiaz Noor Mohammad. He's a marketing and tech practitioner. Today we're discussing the VPN registration that is underway, and the deadline that has been provided by the PTA is November 30th, which is just this weekend. Imtiaz, can you tell us a little bit about what this registration process entails? Because it divides people into individuals and companies, and also individuals. They had listed freelancers initially. And they're requiring a certain amount of information from people. Do you know people who have registered already, or what this process entails?
First of all, Priya, thank you for having me here. The process is generally straightforward, right? It's not a complicated process. But the problem is the information that's asked of people, and I think that is slightly unreasonable. So first of all, there's a step to create an account, and then you have to be a company with registered taxpayer status in the country. But essentially, it's the fact that government first of all wants to know who you are. The second part is when it comes to individuals. Now we must remember that Pakistan in general, I mean PSCB has about what 3,000, 4,000 exporters in its platform. Pasha is an industry association for IT members, IT companies, 800, 1,000 ish. Right now, not everyone's an exporter, but the fact remains that a lot of companies will need VPNs, and the need for VPN expands beyond, tech companies. It expands to a lot of companies. Anyone who has critical infrastructure which requires security will need a VPN to a certain extent or the other. The requirements are very straightforward. However, one key requirement is a bit funny and odd. Is to have a static IP, right? Especially if you are registering a location from where the VPN is initiated. Now, which is funny and weird because if you are connecting to my servers, my server needs to be whitelisted, and that's fine. It needs to be registered. 20,000 people who connect to my system don't need registration. And that's fine for companies that have a single VPN operating within the country. And it's practical from within the country because the company that's issuing the IP address also needs to then verify the application, right? It becomes a bit funny when you have an IT company that's based in Pakistan, 100 odd employees, a lot of people work from home, and they have to connect to various services around the world because they can have clients around. And that's where it gets tricky because you have to register yourself, and then you have to declare that you're using your location as a VPN. Now, generally tricky situation of Pakistan where internet is generally up and down, right? It's predominantly practical to have multiple ISPs. Something's not working on my home computer, I'll just connect my phone's hotspot and start using. If I'm not home, I'm at the airport, I'm going to connect and start using because that's how I work. And this applies to everyone. That's the whole point of work from home. Work from home doesn't mean you're restricted, tied down to home. The requirement includes a static IP address. The static IP essentially means, let's just go back for a bit. The IP address is an IP address assigned to you by the ISP, your internet service provider. These are typically dynamic. When you say typically dynamic, it means that these are addresses that keep shifting over time as people connect, disconnect, all that stuff. A static IP address is actually limited in quantity, and a dynamic IP address could essentially also be IPs that may not need external access. So if someone's trying to connect to you from an external perspective or external location, it may not be possible for them to entertain you directly using a dynamic address. It's slightly more trickier because they need to still know who you are, and addresses keep changing. With static IP addresses, they are typically directly connected to the external world. So an ISP will have probably in the range of 200, 300 odd static IP addresses, and they'll spin off dynamic address out of those. When you have asked for a static IP address, that's a dedicated address specific to you, assigned to you, working for you. And those are far and few in between. They cost more. So you as a freelancer or you as a work from home practitioner would have to go to your ISP, ask for a static IP, pay the extra cost, which is in dollars because we acquired static IP addresses from other world practitioners and players as a country, right? Those are paid for in dollars. This is a foreign revenue outflow, foreign exchange outflow. Then that IP gets assigned to you and you pay an inflated bill. You are paying an inflated bill. And not only that, but your application is also supposed to go verified by an ISP. So if I'm working with a tier one ISP, your Cybers, your Supers, your Nayatels, these major players, that's fine. If I'm working with a second tier, third tier ISP, which essentially goes to these larger ISPs, buys internet capacity in bulk, and then does a local area distribution. And these are prominent in multiple areas, right? So local land-based internet service providers, which exist in many residential locations. It becomes tricky because then who's going to verify their application? So that becomes tricky because those guys are like, we don't care who you are, what you do. We're just giving you cheap internet. This is the cost. And they may still be able to give you a static IP. It's just going to be tricky. So the ISP has to verify you. You need a letter from your employer. Now the employer part is also tricky. What if I'm operating out of Fiverr or Upwork and working freelance with, let's say, 10 companies at a time? What do? Who's going to write my letter? If I have a company in Pakistan and I've assigned my local 20 employees to work from home, that makes sense because they're my employees. On paper, I need to register them as freelancers, which is not it's a convolution, even though they're my FTEs. I can do that, but there's no point in me mentioning them as freelancers. And then, of course, I'm okay with giving them a letter. What if my clients are in the US, UK, wherever, and I'm working on a 2-month project with them? It's a freelance project. I am a freelancer in its pure form. What happens then? Because who's gonna write my letter saying that, hey, this is a genuine client that needs who needs a VPN connection? So I am cut off from the grid from that perspective. So it works well for local companies that have work from home employees. Doesn't work for freelancers who work for international clients, especially on short contracts.
So, like you said, there is a cost attached to this as well, right? And just the way the ecosystem is now and freelancers work from home, it gets even more challenging. I mean, leave aside the scalability, also the other privacy concerns, that's a whole different issue. But just in terms of cost, how
Yeah,
you
that's a whole different
manage
debate.
this? And also, I mean, in terms of the registration, typically what we've seen around the world where registration requirements exist, the VPN providers are required to register. And here, what's happening is that you, as an individual or a company, are required to register. Now, not when you're working from home, you're probably using your own personal VPN, even if it's for work. And then the company has a different one, right? How do you navigate in this system where you have to register, disclose your IPs, and then there has to be a static IP as well? And how do you see this? I mean, have people successfully done it? Because we've seen VPN blocking happening as well. So you don't know which VPN is going to be available either, right? And some people have purchased VPNs. There's no way to operate without a VPN for most people.
So I think, see, people have registered and that's doable. That's not the problem. The problem is, well, the applications are, going a bit slow. I think that process picked up. They might just extend the deadline. That's my thought, right? I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone here. That's my thought, considering the number of applications. I know companies that have 200 employees and they're getting IPs registered and stuff like that. But the whole process of, employees first needing to go to their ISP, asking for a static IP. 8 out of 10 times, a lot of these smaller ISPs, which if you have a smaller connection, they just say, no, why do you need a static IP? No, we're not giving a static IP. Of course, you're going to talk to them and they're going to give it to you. Some may even require you to have a corporate connection instead of a home connection, which is more costly. Because at home connections are distributed connections, they're shared connections, they come at a dirt cheap cost, right? 2.5, 3.5, 1,500. Dedicated capacity may cost up to 10K, for example. Right? So the whole price changes there. Even if they don't require corporate level connection, they might still give you a static IP, but that's going to cost what, $500,000 add on your bill, which is a monthly cost. So there's that. Then people have ended up registering. That's what happens when you're working for external clients and you have multiple clients. So you have your IP, which you've whitelisted, but then who's going to approve who's going to sign off on your letter, or why you need an ISP, why you need a VPN? What is the chance of PTA or any other body who's going to be approval, who's going to recognize that, hey, that company is a legitimate company? Because 20,000 companies, 100,000 companies might be out there in the US, UK, wherever. Some of them will be startups. Even in Pakistan, I've had the opportunity to have built companies and worked with engineers on a lot of things. We've built processes in place where you need a VPN to access one of the main servers. That's a security measure, right? Am I comfortable telling that server's IP to the regulator? Why do I need to tell? Even though it's in Pakistan, I can tell them, that this is an IP that needs access from, 10 people or 20 people in my engineering team. Why do I need to disclose that? It's just ridiculous. It's an asset we don't tell anyone. It's like when you go to many companies and you ask for their Wi-Fi, if you do, a lot of times their IT guy will come and just enter it into your PC. They won't tell it to you, right? Even though they may be fully aware that you're fully capable of doing this, and you may be someone who's parallel to them in technical capabilities. It's a security procedure. You're not going to tell them. Of course, they may find out by some other means. They can log in and check certain logs and still find it. They know that. But just the fact that they're not telling you is taking a step in the right direction. Exposing this data to the government is not cool. It serves no purpose. If I'm registering from my house, then my house's static IP is assigned. But if I'm traveling, if I'm not in the house, that's the whole point of work from home. I mean, there's many videos and jokes around it. Work from home doesn't mean work from home. Work means work from anywhere. But I am then bound to my home. And what if my main ISP is down? Then what do I do? Because that IP will only be available via the main ISP. We live in a country where internet comes and goes. So it just becomes more cumbersome.
And the thing you mentioned about disclosure is what is important, right? Typically, VPNs are used as a data security and data privacy measure. I mean, in Pakistan, of course, we use it for circumvention, but
Yes.
corporations use it for data security, and some of them have very stringent requirements that you cannot access servers, as you mentioned, or transfer data unless you're using a secure VPN. So
Correct.
would this impact this registration policy?
Would this impact the registration? It would impact the registration policy. But here's the fact, right? VPNs are used over the open internet, right? Which is where we know the internet is open and it's publicly, there's risks, there's threats. And from a security perspective, some companies will require additional security parameters on devices. But even if you leave that aside, if you're accessing my system, everyone wants to be sure that no one has an eye on it or the ability to identify exactly where this traffic is going. The moment you talk to and share this data with a regulator, your connection already becomes known to it. At this point in time, prior to this, the existence was not known because you were behind a VPN. It looks like normal traffic. Now the existence is known. The existence is identified, and the points from where the existence takes place, the start and the termination, are both identified. And let's be honest, these systems can very well mask themselves as, they're very capable of doing DPI, deep packet inspection, which is a mechanism to identify traffic within secure tunnels. It's another way of firewalls, and certain degrees of firewalls are very capable of doing DPI. If they do it over the open internet, it's still, you're looking for a needle in a haystack if you're looking for someone. But if you're disclosing a connection between two locations, that means you're telling anyone, hey, if you want to look at me, this is exactly where it's supposed to look. And I think that puts everyone in a very compromising position. I'm not talking about anti-state or whatever activities here. I'm just saying, even for legitimate activities, why do I need to disclose this? This is the privacy of my own home that someone's asked to install a door and a window at. It makes absolutely no sense. This is, within the confines of my home, I'm free to do whatever I want. Any laws that get broken, whatever, if they get broken, yes, those are limitations. You can't do illegal stuff. Aside from that, why does the government then need to keep an eye inside my home? This is equivalent to installing a camera inside.
So lastly, just rounding this off, what do you foresee, what will come out of this process in terms of any challenges that you think are going to be faced by the industry? And when I say industry, obviously not just the larger companies, but like you also mentioned, the e-lancers, etc. And whether some feedback has already been shared with you by people who have registered.
So the feedback shared with me has been that it's a slow process. It's not a difficult process. It's a slow process for sure. And yes, the requirements regarding ISPs verifying certain data points and then requirements of a letter, right? So that affects freelancers directly. There's two types of freelancers here. There's freelancers who work on long-term contracts, so they're covered. That's not a big deal. Freelancers who work on short-term contracts, they become a problem because who do they work, right? There are a lot of people who will go in, do small projects and get out. A lot of them will use VPNs out of the blue because a lot of the content is not accessible. So if I'm running social media for a third party company in the US and for some reason I need to access Twitter, that's not accessible in Pakistan. I need to use VPN by default. So that changes everything to start off with. If I need to access certain services and certain servers, not all of them may have these requirements of having VPN for access. But if I'm accessing a company's internal system, I will still need to use a VPN. Some companies go to the extent of setting up their own VPN servers, which you need to access from your office, from your home, or wherever you are, from laptop, your device. They don't care about which IP you come from, as long as that's the IP you terminate at. But if I am based in LA and my company has a VPN server, why would that company, my client company, go and register that VPN server against? It makes no sense. So naturally, the route is I, as the end user, will need to connect and verify that connection with PTA. Again, static IP is needed. So if I'm working from home, I am bound to home. If I have a field-based role where I need to travel, I'm a researcher. I need to travel. I need to do a ton of other things, which means I do not have that access. The whole perspective of keeping the VPN in place is that, it doesn't matter where you are. The connection is secured between your devices. It doesn't matter where you are. At least you have a secure connection to our services. You can connect from any network that you have. Some may be secure, some may not be secure. And that's why VPNs exist, to provide security for businesses, for critical infrastructure. We, on the other hand, are a circumvention company. And I think this stems from the fact that we are extensively becoming a state where, well, we always have been a state where people are assumed guilty until proven innocent. But now it's going to the next degree. It's going to the extent of, internet access and access to information as well.
And something you mentioned, we don't have stable internet connectivity. We keep switching between connections because one or the other drops, and now these requirements are added on. Just because you mentioned that, if somebody would not outside of Pakistan, and there's a client and you keep changing clients, and if they don't want to disclose and you're working with them, ultimately, then what happens in that situation where they are not willing to provide any confirmations, verifications, letters, disclosure? Do you end up losing contracts?
Yeah, of course. You lose contracts. We're already losing contracts, right? For different reasons. I mean, there's different cost reasons as to why businesses are losing contracts in Pakistan. But the fact is, this is another reason why businesses will lose contracts in Pakistan. The only way Pakistan now successfully operates internationally is if it becomes an unknown back office for a tech company based in, US, Saudi, wherever, right? Because the challenges pertaining to A, Pakistan's image, B, pertaining to the tech infrastructure, just make it difficult to operate.
Thanks, Imtiaz. This has been very insightful. Hopefully, this also, if for the audience, they're able to understand some of the more technical things that are associated with this registration process. Let's see what happens November 30th. We've already seen a lot of disruptions with VPNs already, and we don't know going forward what internet connectivity in Pakistan is going to look like. That's all on the DigiPod for today.